The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. And good morning. Welcome to the Old School, a podcast about the American education system. And we've been known to dip our toes into various other topics, not the least of which history, culture, food, travel. But today we stick with our bread and butter as we go with education. And with me in that endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good morning, sir.
Morning here, Miller. How's it going over there? I'm personally a little tired and in a good way. I feel sort of satisfied, tired. And I don't know, the next week will be work, but I feel like almost like there's this dividing line of respite. You know, the wind goes out of the sails, and then uh, what do? You raise your sails again and start puttering along with your electric engine, right?
Well, yes, you got a busy week. I have a busy weekend coming up. We're moving the in-laws down to stay with us, and so
This is it.
it's about this is it. So I get to drive the moving truck from Kansas to Texas. I hope they have the latest in radio technology, and so I can plug in and listen to podcasts or listening to sporting events or whatever the case may be. But yeah, so we're driving down on Sunday, so that means whatever we release next week will probably be recorded in absentia, at least as far as us having recorded on the spot. But we'll have something,
So you say
no
Sunday
doubt.
as in tomorrow,
No,
or
no, no, no. Next week, next week.
so you're leaving next Sunday?
Yeah. So
Oh,
anyway, so we're gonna play that by ear, but don't forget to follow the Old School Podcast on Instagram, the Old School Podcast 2021. Great host, great information, great updates on upcoming episodes and everything else in between.
hmm. We
There's
should
a
check that
commercial
out
for you.
ourselves. This old school sounds really good.
I know.
Yeah.
We should be friends. Yeah, friends, we should follow ourselves.
Have you listened to our podcast before? Because you have about what 12 hours each way or something like that of driving. You could knock out a few episodes.
It is interesting. I have heard the podcast before.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'd be breaking any new ground by tapping into the Old School Podcast, but I will say that many of our episodes are certainly worth listening to more than once. So
Yeah. Yeah. I listen to our European travels every day when I wake up just to be inspired. And
I don't think that's true, but okay.
oh,
So
yeah, you never know. So where
let's
where we
let's
drive where
let's
are we driving where are we driving today here, Miller? I'm curious what you're going to come up with because we've been having guests and suddenly
Mhm.
it's just the two of us. So what's on your plate? What are we going to do?
Well, I think one of the things that if you do follow us on Instagram, you will have no doubt seen various posts from various German education accounts talking about the desire for and the need for a digitalization of German schools. If you, it's a pretty good chance, probably most of y'all listening have never been inside of a German school, but it is remarkably old school in the way that they present. There is a little bit of technology, but it is not nearly at the level that you see in the United States. And I think there's a lot of German educational experts that kind of look upon the United States as like as a role model for how to digitize their schools. And there have been a couple of occasions when I have engaged with some of these uh, organizations and authors and experts, talking about the need to digitize and basically saying, be careful what you wish for. Make sure you're asking questions. Um, how would you describe the current level of technology in a German classroom?
I think there's a lot of paper going
Mm,
around and people taking notes. I mean, can you picture in a German classroom, and it's been a while, you have students with their laptops open taking notes and
yeah.
having, like happens in US colleges all the time now,
Mhm,
and cell phones sitting next to them on their two, they have a desk seating two students, and on that would be a laptop open or closed and a cell phone sitting there and posting assignments online and having a grading portal where the German parents can check and monitor and get updates and notifications whenever they get a grade that's below a three, you know, or it's a bit of four or five, or So I don't know. I can't see it, or it would be a big change in philosophy. And I feel a little sad, actually. I like those sheets of paper that are taller than ours, if you recall.
yes, yes.
And and there's a little awkwardness to that because it doesn't fit in our notebooks and we have to fold over the
Mhm,
top, and that's kind of my word picture of Germany and technology. I'm totally wrong. They probably
yes.
say, "Oh, wait a minute, we use it more than you do." Um, but
I,
it,
I think
yeah,
it remains a paper-centric exercise.
yeah,
And it's for those of you who did not listen to podcasts we did a couple episodes ago where I talked about the fact that I've returned to the classroom and I have taken over a group of classes for from a teacher who decided in February that she was done. And so I've picked up her classes. They are freshmen. I haven't taught freshmen in like 15 years, I think, maybe 20. And but I remember the first day that I came in because everybody in the school does notes on computers. Not in every class, because some teachers are a little bit more old school than others. But I remember my first day in there, I said, "Y'all better get a notebook." I said, "Because we're not taking notes on a computer, we're taking notes on paper and a pencil." And you could see, I don't know if it was a question of being confused by the idea of taking notes on paper or simply confused by the rather sudden change in direction.
wow,
But it was not an easy I think for some folks, it was not an easy transition because I think one of the first things I had to teach them was how to take notes. And I don't know how long it's been since they regularly took notes on paper. First of all, taking notes is something that's never taught and should be taught to students because they don't know how to do it. But it was definitely a change. And I think that the notion of German students using a keyboard to take notes, it doesn't ring true. Now, again, it's been a couple of years since I've been there, so maybe things have changed. But if you read the news coming out of Germany in these various education feeds, they feel that it's still very much a kind of a traditional format in many German schools.
yeah. I'm To me it's concerning in a way, but at the same time we know that in Germany they're very tech forward, so outside of school,
Hmm.
they're as comfortable digitally as our students, if not more so. They're very
Right.
adept on social media and they use those tools all the time, just not in that classroom space. Um, so the initiative, if you want to call it that, to digitize German education, there are a lot of ways to do it. And the first thing would be to have the infrastructure. And we did that a long time ago, where everything is wired. Do you recall? I mean, you were there a couple of years ago, that the whole school is wired for internet. Did they have computer labs? Because that was like our early step, is you have
Yeah.
a place with um, do you remember that being in there?
They do have a computer labs now, and I think but it's still kind of like separate
Hmm.
entity. It's not like within a particular classroom. It's like it's its own classroom and its own part of a building. And it's still something that's kind of there's still kind of a physical distance between where all the computers are and where the instruction takes place. And again, I want to make it clear that, my experience and Steve's experience to a lesser degree, because he has a little bit broader experience with this sort of stuff. My experience is just with only a handful of schools. And so I'm using that as kind of a barometer by and kind of extrapolating what things might be like in other schools around the country in Germany. But the idea is that it's still kind of a separate entity, this computer room. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, the infrastructure I think is starting to get there, but um, I'm wondering if you were in charge. One of the things we have, one of our kind of our mentors from a literary and educational philosophical sense is Neil Postman, uh, born on and this week in history. But one of the things he talked about was the importance of asking questions about the technology that's implemented. If you were in charge, what kind of questions would you kind of mandate that German school districts and schools do and confront before digitalization?
Well, you know this quote better than I do, but the idea of solving a problem that may or may not be a problem. Um,
Mm,
and what's the quote you talked about? Or the quote has to do with an improved means to solve a
yeah.
problem that may or may not be a problem. So
Mm,
they're addressing a problem of sorts. I mean, why does anybody bring technology into the classroom to be more efficient to prepare students for the real world? Because once they finish there, they'll be in offices using all this, so they need to know that. But it also we've turned a corner, and we're about to face the the prospect of AI in the classroom, which is transformational in so many more ways than wheeling in a cart of laptops, which is
mhm.
kind of the second stage. And actually, there's a pre-stage, if you remember. In fact, we went through all of this. You wheel in the television, right, with the we
Yeah.
sort of stick in there. Eventually, those become discs, and you wheel that out, and you walk them down to the computer lab. And I remember those early computer labs where I was scared to death that they would be doing things on that computer that they shouldn't be. So you're walking behind them, seeing what's on their screen, and that was a bad period. And then the laptops come in, and eventually it's a one-to-one where they have the device, and they'll say, check your phone and indicate if you the right answer to this, yes or no, and then it all pops up on the screen. But that's just the beginning, the preliminary. And so I would say that the Germans would have to go through those steps. You can't just bring in one-to-one AI that's individualized in instruction. So they have a process uh, to go through. And so to get back to Neil Postman, what is the problem that this is solving? Um, um, I'm not even sure because I mean, and that's why we're the old school, right? Because we look at the test scores, and our guests have brought that up also, that our scores have flatlined and dropped a bit in math, despite unprecedented investment in technology. So, is it working? Is it and the Germans, are probably having those same conversations, but they're much more. I mean, particularly their teachers who have been there forever are probably going to push back just like they would like you would, in that situation.
Um, it is, it will be interesting to see what transpires. I think from the teacher, you're talking about, Neil Postman's idea, what problem is being solved by introducing technology into the mix. I think that's perhaps one of the worst answers because the teachers that I've talked to, when we talk about the question of digitalization, they talk about it in terms of, well, the Americans are so far ahead with regards to technology.
Yeah.
And it's not even a specific problem that they're thinking about that would then be remedied with the presence of technology. It has more to do with the perception that because other countries or other systems have technology more embedded into their educational processes, that somehow Germany is doing something wrong by the very fact that they don't. And when I think about, and of course, the other thing is that when you think about the digitalization of German schools, not only do I think about how much that will change the schools, but I also think about how much that will change the culture because the culture is a little bit more resistant, it seems, in my perception. And of course, I'm an outsider, so what do I know? But from my perception, it seems like the Germans are a little bit more resistant to being headlong into their phones all day. They seem to be a little bit more measured about that. But how will that change if kids are basically coming into the early stages of German schools and computers are a big part of almost everyday workings?
Well, it's possible that the the Germans are coming into this at the right time. The I mean, our complaint often about um, putting technology in the classroom, particularly using software that where a student is staring at a screen and they're working independently on the computer to learn math at their own pace, and they're all supposedly punching keys and processing this learning is it comes down to assessment. And we've always been concerned that the nature of digital learning is that the student is still clicking a box and getting a little bell that rings if they get the right answer, maybe a badge, and they move on to, but it's objective grading on everything they do. Um, and now it has changed. I mean, what a shift, because all of that can be wiped away with generative AI, where suddenly the student can be speaking their answer. They can be typing their answer, but it could be a fuller answer, and then they get immediate feedback, and the conversation will continue. So so the potential now to not just be multiple choice, click the blank, get the thumbs up, move on. Um, it's very different, and it can truly be individualized and adaptive to that student, and it can also force them the type of response that you and I want, which is a full response in writing or by speech. So if you're going to get into this, it's not a bad time. And I think that maybe the pressures of AI, they suddenly have to do it.
I can see your point where you say this might be the right time. As long as they take as a mantra to see how everything they want to do has played out in other places. So they say, we're going to introduce this. Okay, what happened in the United States when they introduced this? What was the cause and effect, or what have you? If they do that kind of analysis, you're right. They have the ability to basically pick and choose from the technology that which is only affirming or only makes the educational process more productive and more genuine. I think the I think the downside to the downside to it is that when I read these articles, I don't see the need for questioning. I just see the need for the digitalization. Now, of course, these articles are about digitalization, and so that's going to be their focus. But I don't see the reflective part yet. Maybe that's coming next. Maybe that's the next batch of articles or essays or whatever the case may be that talks about this, that, or the next thing. But I want it. I'd feel more comfortable for my German friends and colleagues if the articles had that more reflective piece. Right now, it's not there. But again, it could just be a product of I'm not reading the right ones, or who knows.
Well, if you picture the role of a teacher in Germany, um, you have two or three rows of desks, tables, actually, with two seats on each one. That's how it always is. And students sit there looking forward at the teacher who's in the front of the room who runs the class. And so if they have a group activity, it's more natural to do it at their table. Um, or but I mean the setup. is teacher centered. And so in a way, it's a more profound change than what we had because we were already experimenting with all kinds of arrangements and project-based learning and lots of group work and flipping the classroom. And whereas they're taking notes on what the teacher is saying and they're answering questions from them, and they're sent home to do their homework, which they have to do, and
Mm,
they take tests where they write. So
mm,
what could be more different, where we're
yeah.
giving multiple choice tests and we're mixing them up. They're doing lots of projects, lots of things in there, but our assessment is different than theirs. So they have a teacher driven classroom and mainly written uh, assessment, not bubbles. So the bubble idea is for the most part an American idea, except for those international tests.
Mhm. Um, I was just thinking about the the kind of the comparing and contrasting the school where I'm currently at
Mhm.
with uh, the same idea because I think that my students have grown accustomed to doing all their tests on computers at home. It's just, it's just, I think they take it as a given. So much so that when I told them that we would be doing all tests on paper in class, uh, they were flummoxed. They didn't understand.
I'm sorry,
You
that's me
could, you could,
holding back my laughing. I'm glad I'm not holding my cup of coffee right now, as I
but
can
just,
see
I mean,
them going through the stages of grief very quickly. So we can't have our note taking, we can't have our phone, and we're going to do writing tests in a blue book, basically, not
yeah.
with the confines of our bedroom and all the resources there.
Well, it's just, because they're so accustomed to doing everything on computer. I was reminded of a student who once said, that she wanted to write her essay on a computer. And she said she writes better with a computer. And I said, and I told her, I said, writers used to say that about drugs, So I told her I didn't buy the argument that somehow writing on a computer was easier.
She said,
It's the same. It's the
she
same thing with
said,
taking notes. They want to take
yeah.
notes on a computer, and one kid asked me why can't we take notes on a computer? I said, well, I said even if we disregard the scientific evidence that suggests that people tend to remember more what they physically write as opposed to type. I said I said a problem with typing your notes is you end up typing more than you need, and you never go back to studying it. And it just becomes a kind of a self-defeating purpose. And so. Um, Yeah, and so I think about, our German friends and what kind of process will it be for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, you're at a private school that I would have expected a little bit more old school, and a lot of private schools are without the technology. And I mean, I hear from a lot of parents, and they, particularly of classical schools, and they like the no technology.
Right.
That's one of the reasons that they're sending that because they get enough of that,
Hmm.
outside of class for about 8 hours a day. Essentially, they have a full-time
Yeah.
job outside of school,
Right.
being on their computer and on their phone, which is I don't even like the sound of that. I'm on my phone.
Right.
There's something horrible about that idea. I'm on my phone. Oh, okay. I feel a little depressed about Germany. I have a love for the old school approach that they do, and it was comforting. This is how it's always been. And the part that bothers me is that you and I have both noted, over 20, 25 years that the German students, high school students, particularly whom we encounter, are so much more interested in the world around them. They're so than our students. They're articulate. They have opinions that they can defend. And I'm not downgrading our students, but just relatively, we've been always impressed by the maturity, and I think we would attribute some of that to the method that they use in the German schools, and they're not taking what would call shortcuts that we're doing.
Or I talked about earlier that, the one of my fears is that what becomes ubiquitous in the schools will soon become ubiquitous in the culture in general. And what I've said on this podcast before, usually when I'm recording from Germany, is that one of the things I appreciate about German culture, one of the things I appreciate about French culture in the times that I've been in France is the willingness of people to discuss things, and it is an integral part to the schools that we've been in, that there are discussions, that there are conversations, that there are debates. I remember when our colleague brought some German students over and she said, "Do you mind having a discussion with them about the American healthcare system?" I said, and I told her, I said, "I can't imagine that will be interesting." Oh, they're very interested because it was at the kind of the nascent stages of discussion with regards to what later is termed Obamacare,
Right, right. They
and
wanted to know.
they wanted to know, and they wanted to know why some Americans were against it, and the kids were fascinated. They were riveted, and I remember trying to explain to my American students from time to time, listen, when you go over there or when they come over here, they have the capacity to discuss difficult things, and they're going to want to discuss difficult things, and it's not something that we encourage. It's not something that we have as an integral part of the educational experience. And so I think that that is one thing that I would be very worried about would change
Mhm.
is this penchant for, and dare I say, even a love for discussion, because when we have discussions in Germany, we're not talking about soccer. I mean, we have, but we're also talking about philosophy. We're talking about religion. We're talking about they love to talk about politics, and so it's not just the low hanging fruit that they want to discuss, but it's the things that kind of raise everybody up to have. There's an expectation that you understand and know what's going on around you, and that's what I worry about. In addition to what the impact of digitalization would have on the schools.
That's a wonderful example, and it actually it's depressing in a way. That wouldn't it be great if our students going over there would say, "Hey, we really want to talk about this and learn from the Germans what they think about this."
Mm.
And that so far, at least with me, that never happened.
No,
They
not by me
woke up
either.
from their sleeping on the plane and kind of walked around, but they didn't have some agenda of things that they just want to discuss.
Yeah.
Um, because I don't think that was generated by the teacher, the German teacher, but it
Mhm.
was actually generated by the students. That's rarefied, at least from our perspective.
Now, part of our reticence to discuss difficult things is cultural. In the same way that the Germans discuss things because of cultural forces, we don't discuss things because of cultural forces. I mean, Benjamin Franklin was once noted to have said that, if at all possible, stay away from death and taxes, meaning stay away from religion and politics. Don't talk about it.
Mm.
And I think that that has been considered a kind of a badge of merit if you could stay away from things like that. And because of that, we find ourselves increasingly incapable of talking about serious issues because there's always been this this kind of forbiddance to talk about difficult issues. And Germans and Europeans in general already consider Americans to be superficial, and I think part of the reason why they think that is just because sometimes we're known for our politeness and they see it as a little bit phony. And I'll take that because I think that we're great that way. And I think that's a strong suit of ours because the politeness can turn into openness and curiosity and acceptance a lot faster than other places. But I do bemoan the idea that we are reluctant to get into the fray unless you're on Twitter and you have an anonymous account and you're sitting there screaming about whatever the hell you're screaming about. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about genuine conversation.
Right. In person with people over a glass of wine or whatever. But
Yes.
but yeah,
Just one glass of wine.
well, of course, yeah, within reason. Moderation is
Yes.
the
The
um
key, yes.
yeah, and be of age, of course.
Mhm.
Um, but and I think for us now, unfortunately, we are talking about politics specifically, but we've been given this curated view that each person has their camp and they have their talking points. And you might as well just say, here are my talking points. You know,
Yeah.
take a look at them. Let me see yours. Okay, now we can just drink the wine and not talk about it anymore. It's a lot of talking points. Um,
But see, it's not even talking points in the way that a German might have talking points, because these are talking points that are one to be avoided to be discussed,
yeah,
but two, these are talking points that are not necessarily individually considered by the person. It's just that these are the points from my camp, and this is the points from your camp,
yeah,
and we better we better not cross swords, you know. So we're gonna stay on each other's own side. So it's even those who will express political opinions. You know, we talked about it before with American students. They fold like cheap lawn chairs.
the questioning.
The moment you get two or three certainly three questions in. I mean, hell, two can throw, one can throw them. So
Make it stop. Make it stop. Well, think to about Neil Postman, his, I think more famous line that we put on our podcast as the opening quote, um, was to diagnose the biases of our current culture and then to oppose them. And that's the purpose of education, is to prepare people to do that. And so recognizing the problem that we're talking about right now about having, not being able to talk about serious things and to not recognize or acknowledge the other side of an issue. That's a role of education, and particularly something like history, that could be your mission essentially, is to address that.
it does make you wonder if Neil Postman was in Germany, would going against the prevailing biases of society not lead to technology, since technology is not nearly as ubiquitous and accepted and doted on in German culture as it is in American culture. But I, you know, for me, it has more to do with fighting against trends and fighting against, capricious standards, capricious goals and ideas. That's what education is designed to do. But people are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, and I mean the genie is out of the bottle as far as all technology. Um, so I just wonder how this is going to roll out, because I don't think, once you start this, you really can't go back. Um,
Mm.
and I mean, we have a lot of, local control of our schools. I mean, really local at the district level.
Yeah.
And so the German Bundesland, the equivalent of our state, has a lot of control over what's going on. So I think that local school is not going to be able to decide, oh, we're just going to stay how we are. Thank you. So the change will happen, and um, and the marketplace. I mean, are we preparing students, to work, or are we preparing them to be interesting people, who can have a nice conversation with? Um, so it kind of cuts to the core of the purpose, as Neil Postman said, the end of education.
Um, it Neil Postman is someone who has been a big influence on me. I don't want to speak for you, but I would think
Mhm.
that he has had a big impact on you.
Perfect.
I'm not sure we have talked about him as much as the impact would suggest that we might talk about him.
Right.
If someone wanted to get, now keep in mind, Neil Postman wrote in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think his last major book was in the early 90s. But if someone wanted to read Neil Postman from an educational point of view, where would you direct them first? Because I think we both agree that no matter how old his books are, they still seem to resonate today with a lot of the things that he discusses. Where would you send someone to?
I would send them right to amusing ourselves to death. Um, and that is dealing with electronic technology, specifically the television and education. So it really started our book that we talked about Sesame Street and the effect of that. And at some point that his argument held up when we switched to computers in the classroom. So he wrote an argument about television, had no idea what was coming next, but he was a prophet. He was prophetic about the argument of something new coming in and what are the unintended consequences. And then suddenly, with the computer technology, and actually his son in the edition that I have wrote another preface, kind of making the point I'm doing right now, that this same argument applies to the computer technology. Um, I wrote a short article um, from the wow, it's out there. I think for the Kern Family Foundation, a little journal that's been shared out there. But it was about the how that same argument applies, even more perfectly to AI in education. And so Neil Postman's argument, if you read it in terms of television, but then thinking ahead to the computer and classroom and now to AI, it holds up perfectly. And in some ways, it's a more powerful argument today than it was. This was an earlier work, in the I think early 70s, something like that. So I would start there. Specific to education, he wrote a work a little bit later called The End of Education. And he does, he diagnoses the problem there, but it's all within the context of education. And there's a second half, which a lot of critics don't have, where he suggests narratives and methods that actually could replace what we have now. But I think the most relevant today would be amusing ourselves to death, and then technopoly, which is specific to technology, but not education is a part of that book, but not the whole thing.
For me, one of the books that I think about is Building a Bridge to the 18th Century,
Hmm.
because I think, we have a prevailing prejudice in this country that what is old is obsolete and what is new is the future, and that's what we should be going towards. And anytime someone tells me we're preparing our kids for the 21st century, I would say, my standard answer is, what do you think the 21st century is? And in his book about building a bridge to the 18th century, he talks about the fact that, listen, these are far from being obsolete ideas, but that the ideas that were discussed in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, in the early stages was about learning how to learn,
Hmm.
and that those concepts and those principles apply no matter what century you're talking about. Everything else is just like window dressing. And so for me, I always connected with the building the bridge to the 18th century just because of these these dismissed ideas
Right.
that actually could be the salvation of students if they're taught it, and if they, because we know student, we've seen it. We've seen a student at a computer and not really engaged in the material. And God forbid if something should go wrong with that computer, they'll spend 30 minutes trying to diagnose it instead of just cracking open the book that's right next to them and continuing their work. It seems to rob them from their ability to problem solve, to think critically, everything that we want kids to be able to do, to learn how to learn appropriately. Um, and I think it's worth considering.
Um, I mean, this type of education can actually help students be better on the computer. I mean,
Hmm.
students are incredibly bad at prompts and at searches. So
Hmm.
they're sort of stumped. And I mean, I can get on the computer or on the AI and get exactly what I need immediately.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so technically, this approach could help, in the business world and so forth. Um, you remind me that there were two parallel books that he wrote early on. Neil Postman also. One is Teaching as a Subversive Activity, where we're essentially training them to look critically at everything. And that's what the
Hmm.
methodology of teaching would do. And then also teaching as a conserving activity. And that's one that I've probably read more, um, where we're actually looking at what we have and um, what's worth keeping. It's to me, it's actually a very positive book, but also based upon what we're doing now. It's a critique of media and how these students are bombarded by media. So how do we conserve them back into the content of learning and not being just washed away by the media? And we've seen that happen too. So we're talking about a prophet that probably will be known. I think he's going to last, quite a while with these because his arguments are just deepening right now. But I would recommend teaching as a conserving activity. I think that aligns very much with, our philosophy of the old school.
I think what's most incredible about those books is that it kind of establishes his bona fides as a prognosticator of future events because those books were written in the 60s, if I
Yeah,
recall correctly. Those are
yeah,
some of his oldest books that he
yes.
published. And yet you can still find relevance in those books, um, as you so eloquently discussed. So,
Well, and he's not a education. I mean, he was a professor of communications,
hmm.
and happened to have a feel for education, K-12, all education. And I mean, what an incredible professor he must have been. Um, but also had a gift of writing for the lay audience. Beautiful writing, very accessible, and making good old-fashioned arguments, one after the other. And that, so just reading him alone is a wonderful experience. And we don't see a sustained argument. And maybe that's one of our critiques that we don't want to lose in Germany is the ability to make a sustained argument.
Well, a lot more certainly to talk about on that front. Not just Neil Postman, but perhaps we can convince one of our good German friends to pop on to get us more of an up-to-date live report from the scene, from the battlegrounds of German classrooms. So who knows? Well, we shall call it a day. We thank everybody for listening. We really appreciate it. Send the link up to this episode to all your friends and family. Follow us on Instagram at the Old School Podcast 2021. Follow us, like, comments, whatever you want to do, just do that and make sure it's about for us and just let all your friends know about it. I think we got some good meat on the bones with this discussion, but we also have some great things coming up in the next few months. So,
Well,
well,
let me demystify the idea of sharing the old school. Every
okay.
every episode has a share link. And if this one is particularly interesting, you go to your media account, whatever it is, LinkedIn would be great, Facebook, and you drop that in the post box, and then the picture of the old school logo will come up with the title and say, "This is great, check it out." And you hit send, and they'll check it out, and suddenly we'll have a lot more people listening to us. But very easy, and we would appreciate it because we're trying to get the word out. And Mr. Miller is doing a lot of work on Instagram, and we have someone else out there who's helping us. But this might be a time to, demystify it. Here's how you do it. Actually share the link, and we'll be very excited about that.
All right. Couldn't have said it better myself. And so with that, I shall say adieu, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Wiedersehen, Herr Miller.